Welcome back to another episode of The Road Chose Me. My name's Dan Grech, and today a topic that's really near and dear to my heart, and I'm really glad somebody asked the question: what is the minimum amount of stuff you need to go overlanding? What is essential gear that you actually can't go without? And then let's talk about some of the things that you might choose to bring on top of that. But first of all, what's the minimum amount of stuff you need? If you've always wondered, stick around, I'll get into it right now. Before we can talk about the minimum amount of gear you need, I think it's important to frame what I'm talking about when I say overlanding. Obviously, it's a really broad thing these days, and it could be everything from a little weekend trip close to home or something like driving around Africa. And for the purposes of this video, and when I say minimalist overlander, I mean everything from you're going to roam up to Alaska for 3 months, or then you're going to turn around and go all the way to Argentina. I really do mean a big, massive global overland trip through many, many countries, tens of thousands of miles. That's what I'm talking about when I say the minimalist overlander. What do you really need? So, what do you really need? Forget about everything behind me. I purpose-built this to drive all the way around Africa for 3 years. That's a totally different ballgame than what we're talking about. So, if you're gonna hit the road and you wanna roam up to Alaska, there's no doubt about it, you need a vehicle. And obviously, a vehicle is a very broad thing to say. Personally, I go with 4 wheels. Tons of people do it on 2 wheels on a motorbike. Tons more people even do it on a bicycle. All of those, as far as I'm concerned, are overlanding. And whether you have a decked out 4-wheel drive, whether you have a Subaru, or whether you just have a sedan, again, that is all overlanding. I met a guy who just driven down to the bottom of Argentina from Canada, driving a little VW sedan. I think it was a Jetta. He'd had the trip of his lifetime. So if anyone tells you a little car is not overlanding, they don't know what they're talking about. So you definitely need a vehicle. I think that is an essential, and you probably can't go overlanding without some sort of vehicle. And my advice is, you don't need the latest and greatest. You don't have to have 4-wheel drive. You don't have to have all the goodies. Most important of all is a reliable vehicle that you trust. Even when I was in the Yukon, I had a $450 Subaru. I drove that thing all over Alaska, multi-day trips, way up into the Arctic Circle many times. And that thing was fantastic. But I didn't set out on those trips right away. I bought the vehicle and I started using it closer to home. I did a huge round of maintenance, everything, even new spark plugs, new rotor, new distributor cap, all of that, oil changes, brake pads, it needed new rotors. I did all of that myself, and it got me familiar with the car and it got me confident about its reliability. And then as the weeks turned into months and years, it never once let me down. So I felt really good about how reliable it was. So when we say a vehicle, the only condition I'm going to put on that is try to make it a reliable vehicle that you know and trust. The next thing that I really think you can't go overlanding without is a place to sleep. And obviously that's very broad. And yeah, you could stay in Airbnbs or hotels the whole time, but maybe then you're blurring the lines of overlanding. So for my purposes, I'm going to say you're doing some sort of camping, but that could be a ground tent, that could be a rooftop tent, it could be a pop-up roof, it could be sleeping in the back of your vehicle. Any of those things are perfectly valid. So if you're on a tight budget, like I was when I went to Argentina, I had my old camping tent that I'd already owned for 5 or 6 years. I threw that in the back of the Jeep with a sleeping mat and a sleeping bag, and that's it. I was good to go. I didn't spend any more money than that, and that kit saw me through 2 years from the top of Alaska to Argentina. So if I can do it with that minimum kit, you can too. Plenty of people build a platform in the back of their vehicle for maybe $100. Plenty more people, if you've got the right vehicle, just fold the seats flat and there's your sleeping setup right there. Probably still need a sleeping mat or a mattress, probably still need a sleeping bag or really good blankets. But certainly that's actually what you need. You don't need a rooftop tent. You don't need a pop-up roof. That's all icing on the cake. That's kind of the more extravagant version. At its basic, you just need a place to sleep. Next thing on the list that I'm going to add is a way to cook your food. And again, could you get the trip done if you just went to restaurants or street food for the entire time? You probably could, but again, my version of overlanding is kind of a little bit more self-sufficient than that. You probably want to cook food if for no other reason than to save money, but also just so when you first get out of bed in the morning, you can have a coffee. Like, these things are really nice. So I'm going to say some sort of cooking setup. On my trip from Alaska to Argentina, I had my tiny little backpacking stove. I bought that 10 years beforehand for maybe $60. I used it for the whole trip and it was amazing. All the way around Africa, I just had a little Coleman single burner stove. That was amazing. So don't feel like you need some huge integrated kitchen setup with dual burners and a built-in fridge and all of that. Again, that's all icing on the cake. For Alaska to Argentina, I purposefully did not have a fridge. I just decided it was too expensive, too much weight, took up too much space in my little Jeep. I had no fridge. I didn't even have a cooler box, so no kind of Yeti or anything that could hold ice and hold food. So my trick was, I only bought food that was fresh that I knew was gonna go bad if I was gonna eat it that day. So I would buy sliced meat and cheese and bread, and then I would just eat it fairly quickly. Whereas tinned food, rice, beans, those I could store for weeks and I'd eat those later on. So you certainly don't need a fridge, you don't need an extravagant kitchen, but I do think you need a way to cook food. And guess what? That is about all you need to go overlanding. And I can tell you from experience, I know that's true because that's what I did. And I met other people on the road doing the same thing. Everything else that you can think of, you don't actually need. Do you want it? Maybe. Is it going to make your trip more enjoyable? Probably, but you certainly don't need it, and don't let anyone convince you that you do. On that though, if you love fly fishing and that's what you want to do, by all means, bring your fishing gear. The whole point of the trip is to enjoy yourself. For me personally, I loved hiking, so I brought a really good set of hiking boots and a backpack so I could always get out hiking. I didn't need them, but they definitely added enjoyment to my trip. A couple of other items that, while you don't need them, I think they are very smart to bring, and I wouldn't recommend that anyone set out on a trip without having them. And the first one, without question, is a good first aid kit. The whole point is to get a little bit remote, to get away from the beaten path. So make sure you've got all of the basics in your first aid kit. Make sure it's easy to reach inside your vehicle. It's really a good precaution to have. Chances are you're going to need Band-Aids, you're going to need some disinfectant along the way. I know I always manage to take skin off my knuckles whenever I work on the Jeep. Along those same lines, I really recommend you have a fire extinguisher in your vehicle. If you are cooking, even if you're just driving long distances and remote, vehicle fires, they do actually happen. And you know, for $20 or $30, I think it's really smart to be prepared and have a fire extinguisher. I've actually used mine way out in the middle of nowhere between Cameroon and Nigeria. I hope I don't have to use it again, but I'm always going to have one with me. And if I wanted to, I could go on all week like this. You probably should bring some warm clothes, especially if you're thinking about Alaska. You probably should bring enough drinking water so that you can hang out for a few days if your vehicle breaks down. Things like that, basic essentials, I kind of am assuming everyone's bringing anyway. But in terms of actually overlanding gear, you definitely don't need any kind of navigation device. I never had one. You definitely don't need all the fancy recovery equipment. I didn't have any of that. Tons of people go without any of that. So really, you only need the very basics. And while we're here, leave me a comment down below. What did you think I was gonna say is actually essential? Or what do you think is actually essential? And do you think I'm being a little bit callous here and a little bit lighthearted saying, no, you don't need all of that stuff, just go for it? I'd be really interested to hear what you think, and I'll do a follow-up video if people are really adamant and if people have good ideas of what I consider, well, yeah, actually, you probably do need that. So I hope that's been helpful, and I hope that once again, it gets you thinking and realizing you don't have to spend the big bucks. You don't have to buy all of that stuff that so many other people and so many other websites are telling you is essential. You know, I drove from Alaska to Argentina without most of that stuff, and I bumped into tons of people doing the same thing. even lots of people are roaming around parts of Africa without most of that stuff that's considered essential. So before you go spending all of that money on gear, think about what you really need for your trip and make it your own. Don't just blindly follow what other people tell you. So I hope it's been helpful. If it has, hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. New videos like this come out every Monday and Thursday, and they come out thanks to my supporters on Patreon. And so they're getting behind the scenes access to my next expedition, the vehicle that I'm building, where I'm going. It's a whole new continent, and actually the timeline is set now. I'm leaving in less than 2 months. I have to get Sandy ready and put her in storage. She is not coming. Global shipping right now is just a joke, so it's going to be way better to buy a vehicle when I get there. So all the details, they're on Patreon right now. There's a link down in the description. From just $5 a month, you can help me bring these videos to life and get all that behind the scenes info and get access to everything that I know as well. I'm now offering vehicle consulting and trip consulting. So if you've always dreamed about going some part of the world and you want to know more about what paperwork do you need, what are the logistics, safety, visas, I will help you with everything that I've learned along the way. That's all over on Patreon right now. So once again, thanks very much for watching. Stay safe out there, and maybe I'll bump into you on the road.